The raft was already too small before anyone died. 5 people were jammed into an 11-foot inflatable in the Gulf Stream, their skin raw with salt, their mouths burning from thirst. Around them, the yacht Trashman was gone. The sea had swallowed the 58-foot boat during the night, leaving scraps of gear, debris, and open water that never stayed still. Deborah Scaling Kiley sat in that raft and listened to the others breathe. She was 24 years old, a proven ocean sailor, and she knew enough to understand the truth before anyone said it out loud. If no ship found them soon, the ocean would take them one at a time. Deborah had not been hired for an adventure story. In October 1982, she joined the crew of Trashman for what should have been a delivery trip from Maine toward Florida. Delivery sailing meant long watches, quick meals, little sleep, and trust between people who might not know each other well before they stepped aboard. Deborah had already built a serious name in sailing. She had completed the Whitbread round-the-world race as a cook aboard Zargo, becoming the first American woman to finish it. She knew heavy weather and what fear sounded like when a boat began to fail. That experience mattered, but it would not give her control over the people trapped with her. The crew numbered 5. John Lippeth was the captain. Meg Mooney, his girlfriend, was aboard with him. Mark Adams and Brad Cavanaugh rounded out the crew with Deborah. They moved down the coast and stopped at Annapolis before pushing farther south. The next leg would take them past the Carolinas and across waters that could turn violent where weather met the Gulf Stream. Offshore, there was no easy exit. Once conditions closed in, the boat and the people aboard it had to live with every decision already made. Trouble came hard off North Carolina. Winds rose into a gale, and the seas built into walls. Trashman fought through it, but the boat was not ready for what the storm gave her. Waves smashed over the deck. Gear broke loose. Water forced its way into places that were supposed to stay dry. The yacht became harder to manage with every hour. The crew was tired and wet, working in conditions where one mistake could leave the boat helpless. Then the boat began to die. A massive wave struck and damaged the yacht badly enough that the crew could not save her. Water came in fast. They had to abandon ship into the inflatable raft. In rough water, that was not a clean escape. It was confusion, shouting, and bodies moving across a failing deck while the sea tried to tear everyone apart. Meg was hurt during the sinking, suffering deep cuts that would later become infected. The others climbed or fell into the Zodiac with what little they could grab. There was no food, no fresh water, and the emergency gear they needed most was lost, damaged, or useless. Trashman sank, and the 5 survivors were left alone. At first, survival meant staying in the raft and staying calm. That sounded simple until the hours stretched. The raft pitched and slapped in the waves. Salt water soaked everything. The sun burned them during the day, and exposure wore them down at night. Their lips cracked, their eyes hurt. They had no fresh water, and thirst became the enemy inside each of them. Deborah understood the rule that could keep them alive a little longer. Do not drink seawater. Salt water did not solve thirst. It made the body fail faster and pulled a person deeper into dehydration, confusion, and collapse. Not everyone could hold to that. As the days passed, fear and thirst changed the people in the raft. Mark Adams began drinking seawater. John Lippeth did too. At first, it may have felt like relief, just something wet moving past the tongue. Then the effect took hold. Their minds began to fracture. They became erratic and delusional. The raft was no longer only a survival shelter. It became a place where Deborah and Brad had to watch 2 crewmates lose touch with reality while sharks circled the water around them. The sharks had found them by then. Fins cut the surface near the raft. Bodies moved below, close enough that the survivors could see them turn. The raft was thin rubber between human skin and animals drawn to weakness, movement, and the smell of injury. Every splash mattered. The survivors could not leave, and the sharks did not leave either. Mark was the first to go into the water. He was no longer thinking clearly. He left the raft despite the danger, and Deborah could do nothing that would bring him back. The sharks took him. It happened in front of the people who had sailed with him. And then the raft went quiet in the way people go quiet when the mind refuses to accept what the eyes have seen. There was no room for ordinary mourning. There was only fear, thirst, and the same water all around them. John followed the same terrible path. He had also drunk seawater and became delusional. He left the raft and was taken by sharks as well. For Meg, trapped with an infected wound and the loss of the man she loved, the ordeal became unbearable in a different way. Her injuries worsened. Infection spread. The heat, salt, and lack of treatment gave her body almost no chance. She died in the raft after surviving the sinking, the thirst, and the first deaths. Deborah and Brad had to push her body into the sea. It was an act no survivor should have to perform, but the raft could not carry the dead and the living together forever. By then, only Deborah and Brad remained. Their world had narrowed to rubber, salt, heat, and the horizon. They had watched 3 people die. They had no food and no water. Deborah's training helped her understand what was happening physically, but knowledge did not make thirst easier. She fought the urge to drink seawater because she had already seen what it had done. She kept her mind on the next hour, then the next. Brad stayed with her, and that mattered. Another living person could be a guardrail against panic, a reminder that rescue was still possible even when nothing on the horizon proved it. 5 days passed after the sinking. By then, the raft was a speck in water too large for human hope to make sense of. Search efforts had not found them. The Gulf Stream had carried them away from the place where Trashman went down. Their bodies were so weak that rescue, if it came, had to arrive soon. Then a ship appeared. It was the Soviet cargo vessel Olenogorsk. To Deborah and Brad, it was not politics, nationality, or Cold War distance. It was steel. It was height. It was people looking down and realizing that the tiny raft below them still held 2 survivors. The freighter took them aboard after 5 days adrift. Deborah and Brad were alive, but the rescue did not make the ordeal feel finished. Their bodies had survived. Their minds still had to carry the raft. Deborah later told the story publicly and wrote about it in her book, Albatross. The disaster became one of the best-known modern open-water survival cases because it contained nearly every fear the sea can produce at once. A sudden sinking, no supplies, thirst, sharks, injury, death in close quarters, and the pressure of staying sane while others lost the ability to survive. But the simplest part of the story remained the strongest. Deborah lived because she understood the danger, refused the one choice that had killed others, and kept believing in rescue after the raft had become a place of death. Her life after the wreck did not erase what happened. She became a speaker and author, using the ordeal to talk about survival, judgment, and the will to keep going when the body and mind were both under attack. But the event itself stayed anchored off the North Carolina coast, where a delivery trip turned into a 5-day nightmare. Deborah had boarded Trashman as an experienced sailor. She left the raft as one of only 2 survivors. Mark Adams, John Lippeth, and Meg Mooney did not come home. The yacht was gone. The trip south was over. What remained was the image of a small inflatable adrift in the Atlantic, sharks moving around it, and a young woman refusing to make the choice she knew could kill her. In the end, survival was not dramatic from inside the raft. It was dry lips, shaking hands, a body desperate for water, and one more decision not to give in. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.